Hello, everyone, and welcome to Superman Homepage Live, brought to you by supermanhomepage.com, the #1 Superman fan site in the world. In this, our September 5th, 2022 show, we're going to be covering a range of topics all about Superboy and Superpup with our guest tonight, Chuck Harter. I'll bring him on in a second, but I want to say hello to my co-host, Michael Bailey, who's just returned from Dragon Con, where you've had a pretty successful weekend, Michael.
Yeah, it was busy, and my feet are killing me. But we'll probably talk more about it next week because there were some cool things that happened and that are Superman related. So,
Yeah,
but they don't
excellent.
want to hear about that today because we've got an interview with Chuck. But I do want to remind everybody that Superman Homepage Live is live. So therefore, we want to hear from you, the person watching us live right now. And to do that, well, it's really simple now. You just go to supermanhomepage.com/live and press the call now button. Or you can take out your phone, scan the QR code below. That's actually right next to me, but it says below, so that's what I'm going to read it. And that'll put you into the green room. And if we have time, we'll bring you in and you can participate.
Yes, and for those who may be a little bit shy, don't want to get on the phone tonight, we invite you to participate in the live chat going there right on YouTube right now with everyone who's watching us live. Feel free to comment, ask questions. Michael and I will keep an eye on those comments to react to them as the show goes along. Well, if you have a question for our special guest tonight, Chuck Harter, we'll be able to relay them to him as well. But if you'd like your question or comment featured live on the screen, that's called a super chat. All you have to do is click the dollar symbol there on YouTube. A slider will appear on your screen. You decide on the dollar amount you're willing to donate. We will feature your comment or question live on the screen as we go to air. And you can there's all super chats, there's super thanks, super stickers, all those kinds of things. Try them out. And thank you to our sponsors and patrons, Douglas Meacham, John Patrick Van Pelt, and Tina Murray. If you'd like to support this website and our live show, simply head to patreon.com/Superman homepage or click the join button below on YouTube. There are different levels of perks for different levels of membership. Well, Mike, we do have a special guest tonight, so without any further ado, I'm going to bring him in to the show right now, Mr. Chuck Harter. Welcome, Chuck.
Nice to be here, super guys. Thank you for having me on. This is the first thing I've done with anybody regarding the reissue of the book, so I'm glad you guys were first.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Now, Chuck, we
Awesome.
go back way back, nearly 20 years ago. We met in Metropolis, Illinois, at the Superman celebration. We both had a fair bit to do with bringing Bob Holliday to the celebration at the time. Good memories.
Oh yeah, that was a lot of fun. I sort of brought Bob Holliday back by doing the book Superman on Broadway. He had retired and kind of didn't even realize that he was remembered, or because he was a Broadway Superman and had done very little film, he was forgotten. So he came back, he had a lot of fun, everyone liked him, and after that, for the rest of his life, he he contacted and talked to a lot of fans and went to some Broadway play reissue shows and really realized that he had taken his proper place among all of the living Supermen. So I was very happy about that.
Yeah, indeed, it's good memories, and yeah, I was very sad when he passed, but he was a great fellow, and really enjoyed a time that I spent with him there in Metropolis, Illinois, at that Superman celebration nearly 20 years ago. So good memories, as I said. Now, the reason we have you on tonight's show is because you're reissuing a book that Michael has in his grubby little hands right there, the original release of Superboy and Superpup, the lost videos, originally released in 1993. Why is it being re-released now?
Well, it was a surprise to me, that's for sure. That was my first book, and I'd finished it in 92, and then it came out in 93. So more or less, all those years ago. In about 6 months, Ben Omart, who is the CEO of Bear Manor Media, I did my last 2 books for his publishing company, contacted me. And he said, Chuck, how would you feel about us reissuing Superboy and Superpup, the lost videos? And I said, well, what? Yes, of course, thank you. I would be thrilled. So we knocked around for a while and whipped it into shape, and here it is. It literally has just become available. I haven't gotten my author's copy yet, so copies, but they're coming. And I'm just glad my first effort, I've been published now 6 times, is available again, because it was a first effort, and I think for a first effort it was quite good. And so anyway, here it is.
So there is new material?
Well, not so much new material, but the cover is new. Originally, 30 years ago, a magazine called Cult Movies put a book out. And I was glad they put a book out. I wrote a book and it got it published. I was thrilled. But they said, we don't have the budget for color images on the cover. And I thought, oh, that's a shame, because I had a beautiful color picture of Super Pup, and perhaps you could have tinted Johnny Rockwell as Superboy in color. Well, 30 years ago, 30 years later, wishes can come true, and it now has color images on the cover. And regarding new material, there really wasn't much I felt I could add. Nothing on Super Pup. And on Superboy, the actor Johnny Rockwell did one Superman celebration in Metropolis, and that was about it. I mean, I could have maybe added 2 pages, but I also thought that was my first effort 30 years ago, and I'm proud of it. You know, I wanted to write a book, and I did, and it's very good. So I'd kind of like that to stand for what the young me 30 years ago worked so hard to do. And it's good. I think it's a very entertaining book. It's got a ton of images in it, and it covered these 2 rather odd Superman-related TV spinoffs.
Yeah, Superboy and Superpup are a bit of a novelty footnote in the history of Superman. What was it about them that fascinated you so much that you felt that you wanted to write a book about them?
Well, it's funny how things happen when you least expect it. In the late 80s, I started doing some research on the George Reeves Superman Original Adventures of Superman series. And one of the first people I contacted was Jane Ellsworth, the widow of producer Whitney Ellsworth. And I went out and visited her, and she was very nice. She had a few photos, not much stuff, but she put me in touch with Noel Neal and Jack Larson and Robert Shane. And Jane and I got to be friends. So, a couple of years went by, and Jane was quite elderly, and she was kind of feeling. And one of the last times I saw her, she went in the back of the house and brought out a shoebox. And she handed me the shoebox, and she said, I want you to have these. You're a sincere fan, and you're a pal. So I opened the box, and to my astonishment, it was original photographic camera negatives from Super Pup and Superboy that had laid in a garage for many, 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 many years. And I went, wow, look at this. And there were all these great images. And then I thought, I've only seen the 2 pilots barely mentioned. Gary Grossman's book, Serial to Serial, does have a picture of each, I think, but it's hardly mentioned. And that was about it. And I thought, well, I've got to start somewhere. First book. Why don't I write a book on these 2 pilots? I've got all these great images. So I started working on it, and that's kind of how the book came to be.
That's fascinating. So good. So, if looking back at this book, you kind of mentioned this a little bit already, but it was published, nearly 30 years ago. Is there anything that you would have done differently, or had the internet been around at the time, would it have made it easier for your research? Well, someone obviously we're talking about it, 1993. You would have been doing it in 92, 93, and then internet really wasn't a thing back then. Would it have been easier in this day and age to do that for you?
Well, a few things. in the other books I've written, I use 4 or 5 vintage newspaper archive sites that has millions of newspapers. I did not have that then. And I only have 1 or 2 newspaper clippings, I think, with Johnny Rockwell, and he had those. And it would have been easier to find the stuff. But still, I managed to interview a family of the Delfinos, who played 3 of the Superpup characters. And they were very, very nice. They had never seen the pilot because they shot the pilot in 3 days. Then they went on to whatever they were doing. And producer Whitney Ellsworth kept telling them for about 6 months, oh, it's gonna go, it's gonna go, it's gonna go, and it never went. So they never saw it. And I was fortunate to find a VHS tape. Remember those, Steve and Michael? VHS tape of the 2 pilots at a underground source. And so I was able to show them the Superpup pilot. And we had relatives, there were 20 people in the room. Oh, it was wonderful. And some of their kids and stuff, they all watched it together and they hugged and cried and, oh, isn't this cute and all that. It was really fabulous. So I interviewed them and I talked to Cy Simonson, who was a special effects guy on both pilots. He was very nice. He had seen them, but not in many years, and he was glad to see him again. And he explained how some of the flying scenes were done and stuff. And I also talked to Clem Beauchamp, who was a production manager on Superpup, and he had never seen since. So I at least had, for Superpup, I had 5 people interviewed, and then he was very reclusive, and he kind of still is, but somehow I tracked down John Rockwell. And you want to talk about what? And I go, you're Superpup pilot. He goes, Superpup? Oh, yeah, that's right. Now, Johnny told me a funny story. John ended up being a close friend of Hugh Hefner because John is a world-class backgammon player, and Hef loves to play backgammon. So he said he lived at the Playboy Mansion in Chicago for, I think, 12, 14 years and never left it but 2 times in the 14 years. Everything came to them, if you can read my understanding. And Hef liked old movies, and he liked to preserve them. So he said Hef tried to find a print of it to show at the Playboy Mansion and couldn't find it. So here, John, here's your show. Really? So I think he ended up taking it over to Hugh Hefner and showed it to him. I hope he did. And he got a kick out of it. So I was fortunate that I was able to interview some principals who are still around. So there is their voice in the book.
Amazing.
Yeah, I also found a copy of that VHS tape in the 90s. So I know exactly what you're talking about there. The first chapter of the book is about...
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I interrupted you. I apologize.
Oh, no, that's okay. It's just the guy who had the tape then is still around. And he actually is one of the guys on one of the George Reeves Superman Facebook pages. So he's kind of getting a kick out of this, too, because he did help on the book all these years later. So I'm really happy. I hope through various promotion and stuff, and Bear Manor Media is a respected publisher who publishes a lot of book on film, TV, actors, actresses, genres, music, and so forth. This time it'll get the proper exposure it should have done then. Cult Movies was a great magazine. It really was. Long run, too. Super good magazine. But I think in a way that kind of did it as a favor to me because I'd written for them and I was a nice guy and I was so enthusiastic. Look, I've got a book on this stuff. Yeah, okay, all right. We'll put it out. And so they did, and here it is again. So in color. So funny.
Now, the first chapter of your book is about Whitney Ellsworth, the producer of both Superboy and Superpup. What can you tell us about Whitney and why he was so important to both of these projects?
Well, they kind of were his projects. Whitney Ellsworth came on to the Superman show in the 2nd through the 6th season. And Whitney Ellsworth had worked extensively with DC Comics in many aspects. So he was a DC Comics guy, and everyone liked him. So he did the Superman show, which was incredibly successful. And when that was starting to wind down, Whit had the idea to do a spinoff as a little kids version of Superman and Superpup, making sort of, I guess, a live action cartoon. Because in 1958, cartoons are really coming up. I'm not sure if Huckleberry Hound had come out in prime time, but cartoons are starting to get wider exposure. So, as the book says, and I don't want to give everything away, but DC didn't really want it. We don't want it. But Whit was such a nice guy, and he was so into it. They said, well, okay. So they kind of shut it literally at the end of the last Superman season, and then they just sat on it. Although it did come out, I believe, and you guys are probably sharper on this than me. It was in a tin, and there was a DVD set with the Chris Reeve movies, and one of the extras was Superpup. And so, in a way, it did eventually come out through DC.
Yep, that's right.
So that was that. And then in 61, Whit wanted the Superboy comic is growing in popularity. Okay, it had been out for a while. And Whit wanted to capitalize on that by making a live action Superboy pilot. So he found Johnny Rockwell, who had worked in TV and done little bit parts here and there, and he was a competent actor. And he kind of threw it together, and it looked very promising. And in fact, the powers that be had commissioned 12 new scripts because the last few seasons of Superman were 13 episodes a season as filmed. So they had the script, so they were really heading toward it. And then what I think killed it was in 61, the old Superman series suddenly is in 5-day-a-week syndication, still in black and white, and is extremely profitable and high ratings. And I think they went, we've got a moneymaker here. Oh, it's too confusing or something, and they let it go. Rockwell himself was told to keep in shape and work out. And again, it just kind of faded away. But to answer your question, Michael, I've been digressing. They were Whit's babies. And Whit, I never met him, but Jane, his widow, talked a lot about him, and he sounded like a really good guy who loved the character. And I think in the 60s worked a lot on the Superman newspaper comic strips. So he was, these are his visions.
Now, the first, after looking at it, what Whitney Ellsworth in the book is, the first thing you do look at is the adventures of Superpup and the story, the actual, story within the pilot. What did you personally think of it as a story as a whole?
Well, let's see, that's 30 years ago. And let's just say in those days, I would occasionally have different altered reality views of life, if I can say that. I was working in LA. I was a rock and roll musician. I was partying till 3 in the morning, so you kind of get what I'm saying. So I got the video, Michael, the one you're talking about, and I went, I wonder how this is. And I think I watched it at 3 o'clock in the morning, upside down, more or less. And I was in hysterics. I just went, this is an acid trip. This is lunacy. It's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles upside down or something. It's crazy. But it was kind of fun. You know what I mean? And, Bart Bent and Perry Bite and all of that. But I loved it. I could see what it was going for. And the fact it would have been in color, which cartoons were becoming in color, there may have been a chance. But I thought it's silly, of course, but it was if you bend with it a little and look at it from a 6, 7-year-old's point of view, it's kind of fun. And then Superboy, I thought, ooh, and I've seen the other scripts. Well, not when I first saw it, but later when I did see the other scripts. It's a shame they made the pilot of that one, because some of the other scripts in fiction element a little more superpower type of things, and the one they filmed is almost like a 50s um, morality show,
Mm.
where your father's job doesn't matter as long as he's right. Now, Whit was very much an all-American guy of that time, so I can see why he picked it. Also, I'm sure it wasn't as expensive as some of the others, because if you look in the book, I have synopsied the other 12 scripts with a photo to represent it or a drawing.
Mm.
And you can see that the other ones would have had more money required in the budget for the special effects. But I thought it was pretty good too, and I thought, oh, what a shame. I wonder if these will ever come out for real. And I don't think Superboy has, but there's a lot of clips on YouTube from it. And I think, again, Michael, even these days, if you know where to look, you can probably find them. But I like them.
They actually included the Superboy pilot when they released back in 2011, 2012, when they released the entire series of Smallville. They included the Superboy pilot as a bonus feature.
Good. Okay, I wasn't aware of that, but that's good. Meaning, if you're a Superman completist or you want to see something a little more obscure yet weird and fun, you can. I'm happy to hear that. That's nice. That's nice.
Now, was there anything in particular about Super Pup that you were fascinated by or that sticks out in your mind?
Well, yes, actually, there was. And I would say this, since this is beaming out to many Superman guys who probably can get a hold of it or see it. Watch this, and it's funny. They literally shot that pilot in the last 2 or 3 days of production of the George Reeves Superman series. So there was no time or budget to get furniture to match the little people's size. So if Perry Bite is sitting in his chair behind the desk, it's actually on Hamilton's chair behind the desk, the big, tall actor. So all the furniture looks huge, and the desks are big and everything. So it's kind of funny because, who's going to know? And they did it that way. So that's kind of fun to see. And also in the book, I have some photos of George Reeves and the flying harness. And you can also see Super Pup in the flying harnesses. Or it's actually lying on a board, kind of. So you can see how they did the flying scenes. So that's what I thought was funny. But again, I just kind of like the whole thing. It's cute. And it's funny, guys. I saw a YouTube post by 3 or 4, and I would say they were millennials. They probably early 30s, and they're all talking about Superpup, excuse me, and they're having a ball. And being millennials, they're, God bless the millennials, they are over analyzing Superpup. And guys, it's a joke for 6 years old. But why does Superpup really feel that Professor Sheepdip is going? Guys, please, this is children's entertainment. But the fact they were talking about it was kind of cute. Okay.
So, yeah.
But no,
Well.
that's what I like. And if I can add one more bit, we'll move on. In Superboy, I thought it was interesting that Cy Simonson, who had done the flying effects in the George Reeves series, did the flying effects for Superboy. And he never did this with George Reeves, which is a shame, but there's a flying scene where John Rockwell as Superboy is flying towards the camera. It's really effective. It's cheesy, but it's projection going, he's flying right towards you. And I thought, oh, shame they never did that on the George Reeves series. He either went sideways or he was pulled on a wire and kind of went up or something like that. So I thought it was an interesting special effect, and just that I think Rockwell would have been a great Superboy.
Mm. Now, was there much of a budget for the Superpup series, and did any of the costumes survive at all?
I'm sorry.
Was there much of a budget for Superpup,
I'm
and did
sorry.
any of the costumes or the head, things survive?
Oh, well, I'm sure the budget was real quick. They had the sets, so they had the crew. I don't know if they wrapped up the George Reeves show 2 days early. Okay, that's good enough. We got to knock this out. Regarding any of the costumes, I asked Jane Ellsworth. I was hoping she'd go, well, out in the garage, there's some boxes you can look. Nothing.
Yeah.
And she had a vague memory, and this is the kind of nice guy Whit was, that years and years earlier, kids in the neighborhood, and Whit gave them the costumes. And they, who knows where they are or what. And I think it's hard to tell from the show. Maybe you guys could guess what the dog heads were made out of. Was it paper mache? Was it plastic? I wasn't sure, but I'm sure they've rotted away.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
unfortunately, no puppy.
Now, The Adventures of Superboy is an interesting concept that, as you mentioned, never got picked up. The pilot episode is serviceable, even if some of the acting a little bit stiff, especially on some of the secondary characters. What do you personally think of the pilot episode?
Well, pretty much what you said. I think it's awful Eisenhower era mom and pop Ozzie and Harriet type of mentality, where they'd have done one of the others. There's a few in there that has a girl from outer space or something that much better. But I thought it was okay. It moved quick. He looked great. Um, he and an actress named Bunny who played Lana Lang, they were pretty good. The others were kind of stiff, as you say, but it it showed certainly potential, and I thought it was okay. I mean, primarily I did the book at first because I had all these images, and I thought, well, it's never been written about. You've never seen anything. I'll write about it. But then I thought, well, wait a minute. These were made. There is a story behind them. People were involved. They do exist. So I just tried 30 years ago to present them as best I could for people who maybe hadn't seen them to enjoy them, or if they liked it enough to try and seek out the bootleg, underground VHS tape to find it.
And that's the thing, isn't it? It's because at the time when you were writing this book, it wasn't readily available. It hadn't been released officially like they have now. So you actually wrote a novelization of the episode. What was that process like for you?
I'm sorry, you were breaking up near the end. Let's try just the last of it, Steve.
Yeah, so what was that process like for you to write that novelization so that people could appreciate the story?
Oh, well, I just, painstakingly with my button, ran it and wrote it, and wrote it, ran it and wrote it. I thought, well, I can at least put stories of it. And they came pretty good. And especially Superpup, since it's so kitty and cute. And that's how I did it. I just wanted to be able to present both the two pilots as stories, and then I've got a chapter each on the production of the two pilots. Yeah, there's John Rockwell when we tracked him down in his West Hollywood apartment, and he posed for the picture. But that's how I did it. I kind of just watched him and wrote him, and then put it together.
Amazing.
Now, someone Steve, and I don't know, Michael, if you've ever been to Metropolis, but Jim Hambrick, who runs the Super Museum there, is a pal. I've known him forever and a day. And when I was working on this, he was the one who had the other scripts. And he said, "Oh, I've got the other scripts for Superboy." "You're kidding? There are other scripts?" He goes, "Yeah." So he donated copies to me, and I thanked him. So that way I was able to at least see what it might have been. And if you use your imagination, you can see them. And then I contacted 3 artists who I knew, and I had extra photos of John Rockwell in the costume. And I said, okay, here's a picture. This one's about Indians. Draw Indians around him, that kind of thing. And they did, and they came out pretty good. You
Yeah,
can kind
they
of
did.
visualize what the missing scripts would look like.
Now, John Rockwell isn't a household name outside of apparently living in a Playboy mansion for 14 years. What was his story, and what would he go on to do?
Well, John's a weird, not weird's not the right word, but very reclusive, very secretive about what he does. I think John was very close to Jerry Buss, who was the president of the Lakers basketball team here in LA. I think he just ran in sort of wealthy circles because he was a world champion backgammon player, and they all like to play backgammon. So he would be at this mansion, that mansion. I think by the early 60s, maybe even just a few years after Superboy, excuse me, the jobs were kind of drying up. He realized, it's not happening. And he just sort of drifted for a while and then somehow met Hugh Hefner. And Hefner went nuts when he saw he was such a backgammon player and said, "You want to live at the Playboy Mansion with all that entails?" And he went, "Yes, I do." And he had a few stories, which we will save for another time when we're not on the air, that I'll be glad to share with you guys. Very wonderful, warm stories. But so that was it. So, John, I think, got a kick out of it. I remember when he didn't want to go to Metropolis for a long time. He didn't care. He didn't want to meet the fans. He didn't care about it. And then eventually I helped some, Hambrick and some other people in Metropolis. He said, well, okay. So I know he went once, and Jim bought copies of the old edition of the book because I had a couple of boxes of them because it didn't sell very much in those days. And so he at least had his weekend. As you know, Steve, there's all stuff going on all weekend, and there's appearances and signing and dinners and all that kind of stuff. And so apparently he had a good time. So good for him. Much like Bob Holliday, at least in John's case, for a weekend, hey, I was Superboy and it was okay. So it was good.
Was having spoken to Johnny Rockwell about the Superboy, was there anything specific about the production that was worth noting, that kind of like an anecdote or a story that might interest the fans?
Well, not too much, really. Um, he remembered shooting it. It was like a 3-day shoot. You know what I mean? Like 30 some years earlier. Just another job in a way. He said he enjoyed it. He especially liked, he was athletic, and he really liked the flying scenes where he would be sort of in a body pan, much like George Reeves was. He liked that. And he just remembered he was really into it. He had a dog that that was a trained dog that could walk on the hind legs or do tricks and stuff. And he really wanted, Whit Ellsworth said the dog can be in the show. I don't know if the dog would have been Crypto, but he would have had a sort of super dog in the show. And he was all excited about that. I'm sure the dog was excited too, and didn't go. So let's just say he was cordial, was happy to do it, but the Delfinos actually had more memories. And again, not many on their part, because that's something that, people need to realize a lot of times. And there's that great sketch on Saturday Night Live with William Shatner, which we all know and love or hate, depending on your side of the fence. It was a little job many years ago. If he'd have done the series, I'm sure he'd have had tons of stuff to say. But at least he gave me some time. He cooperated. He took the picture. He said, good for you. And I managed to get a little book out that I thought covered these two obscure but interesting things rather well. So that's why I'm thrilled they're out again.
Yeah,
or it's out again.
Now, The book's final chapter is on the 12 unfilmed Superboy strips. Had these been filmed, do you think the series would have been a success based on the stories they were hoping to tell?
Yes, absolutely. Cy Simonson told me that it looked promising, excuse me, and that he was even working on some new special effects. He didn't remember specifically, but he was working on some new concepts to show Superboy and some of the science fiction-y type of things. And I think again, if they had a time slot and it wasn't opposite, Ed Sullivan show or something super popular, I think it would have gone because Rockwell was very good looking guy. And I'll bet anything he would have been in the teen magazines as a teen idol, the way a lot of TV actors in the early 60s were, along with pop singers of the day. So, yeah, I think it would have gone. It's just one of those things. I think DC didn't want to conflict on, even though it's Superboy, they didn't want two different super guys on at the same time.
Hmm.
And I'd say another example of that was when the Batman series with Adam West and Burt Ward was so incredibly popular in '66. Why wasn't Bob Holliday a guest on the show? Would have made perfect sense. Superman guests on the Batman show. But again, I think, well, we have the reruns going. That's fine. Let's not confuse the issue. And it's a shame. That would have been amazing. And they probably would have done what they did with series in those days is shoot 3 episodes and turn them into a foreign feature, because that's what they would do sometimes. Probably would have played Australia.
Mm.
So
All right, is there anything we haven't touched on that you'd like to share with fans about your book or about Superboy and Superpup?
well, just I would say anybody seeing this, the book is going to be available in hardback, softback, and I guess in a while ebooks. So it's going to be across the board, which I'm thrilled about. I never even envisioned a hardback book, let alone an ebook. So if you like Superman or you're interested in classic television or superheroes, please pick up a copy of Superboy and Superpup: The Lost Videos by Chuck Harter. It's not that I need the money, but the people I know need the money awful bad. So please pick up a copy. Thank you.
And you can do that by going to
And I
Bear Manor.
wanted to.
Sorry, I'll just let them know that the Bear Manor Media is the website that you can visit to check that out. We've also got the links on our website. You can also get it from Amazon as well.
Yeah, it's available at Bear Manor Media and Amazon. And Michael, I see you have a Superman T-shirt on. Well, I didn't have a T-shirt
Yes.
handy. I don't know if you can see this, but I have a little George Reeves Superman button that I'm wearing. And there's a little story about that. In 1971, I was going to military school in Virginia. My head shaved and, full uniforms and the whole thing. So one weekend, I went to Charlottesville, Virginia to visit a friend. So all of a sudden, I'm in a dorm, I'm wearing jeans, there's long haired this and that running around. So we ended up going to a head shop, a shop that sold albums and incense and rolling papers and all that kind of thing. And they had a bunch of pins. And so I'm looking around, and they actually had a pin of George Reeves' Superman. It's the classic black and white shot colored. And I went, oh my God, I remember that show. I love that show. So I bought the pin, and I still have it. It's been through the wash. I thought I'd lost it. It came back, but I still have it because I was a huge fan of that show. I caught the last couple years when it originally aired in the 50s, and then when it reran a lot in the 60s, and I was a big fan of the show. I loved it, and I thought George Reeves was a great Superman, and it was such a fun show. I didn't really differentiate in those days between the black and whites and the colors. because I don't think color transmission started until 1965. But it was a good show, you know, and exciting to see the comic come to life on the screen. You know,
Sure.
wow, I'd never heard of the Kirk Allen serials until later when I saw a magazine article, and then for many years you couldn't see those. Kirk himself only had one trailer when he did personal appearances, and it was like, wow, you know, 8 hours of Superman, and finally those came out. So I think everything is available, even the David Wilson ABC TV musical. Even that's available if you know where to look. Makes a wonderful drink coaster if you get a DVD of it. But every from the Max Fisher cartoons to the latest guy, and it keeps going. Um, you know, it's funny. I remembered another thing. I don't have it handy, but in 1964, I was living in Buffalo, New York. Kind of a rough year on a personal level, and I had an uncle that kind of hit me to Laurel and Hardy on TV or silent movies, you know, that kind of thing. I was really into it. And he had this little brochure from a company in New York called Movie Star News, and they sold movie photographs. I never heard of such a thing. And one of them had pictures from the Flash Gordon serials. And he says, well, you can buy these pictures. I think it was 50 cents for an 8x10. I said, you're kidding, really? Wow. So I bought a couple. So the next flyer came in, had a picture of George Reeves as Superman, one of the classic shots from 51, you know, where he's looks great. So I bought it. And when it came in the mail, and it was beautiful, probably off the camera negative, and I just looked at it, stared at it. I was just a little kid. Superman is alive, you know, and I still have that somewhere. It's all bent and beat, but it really meant a lot to me to see my comic book hero come to life. And so those are two things I kind of treasure. And I'm sure you guys in your way have similar things that, you know, this is a character that's all-American hero that means a lot to us and to so many people and will endure. I think there'll always be a Superman of one kind or another. And they keep making the movies or merchandising or, you know, it's just great. It's wonderful that Superman has not faded away like maybe some of the other big comic book guys have. You know,
Sure.
like, I can't think of a specific, but Fantastic Four aren't as big as they used to be, you know, that kind of thing. But it's great.
You know, it's funny you mention discovering like how media nowadays is completely and utterly accessible. Like if you want to watch something, you can go to iTunes and in many cases buy it. I remember finding this VHS tape in, I think it was like 97, 98. It was at a comic shop. Perfectly legitimate, I'm sure. And I remember, like, you said earlier, like, you would read things about, like, hear about it, but it wasn't available. And I remember seeing it, was like, oh
Right.
God, this is that Superpup. And did the tape you had have the screen tests on it as well?
Yes, that's right, Michael. The guy that put them together, I don't know where he got them, but he had a short screen test with John Rockwell, and then a few screen tests with 2 or 3 actresses for the Lana Lang part. And those were sort of the bonuses on the VHS tape. And I included all that in the book. And it's funny, John Rockwell in the actual pilot is kind of serious, you know, and feeling his oats. But when he's interviewed spontaneously by Whit Ellsworth, he's a lot warmer. And it shows that, oh, okay, if they'd have done the other 12, he probably would have eased into it and would have been even more effective. But Michael, isn't that something? I mean, a lot of young people now that can press a button and get anything. There used to be a real thrill when you would find something rare, whether it was a rare issue of comic or a magazine or a toy or whatever it was, oh my God, look at this. At a swap meet or a store or something. It was an exciting um, discovery,
So true.
and nowadays,
Yeah,
if you know where to go and who to contact and what to press,
anything's
you can
available.
find all kinds of things.
Yeah, we have a guest caller who you might recognize. Chuck, we're bringing in our good friend. There he is, Brian. Welcome, Brian.
Brian,
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us.
Brian McKernan. All right, buddy.
Yes, you have a question for Chuck, Brian.
Yeah, Chuck, I was curious if there's any possibility they may reissue your Bob Holliday book that you wrote with Bob.
Well, that's certainly a possibility. I'd like to get this sort of under my belt and out. Um, but that's something that might be, for those that are unaware, and I'm sure there's no one, but I'll say it anyway. Brian Kernan and Tony Collins run the Bob Holliday Superman Facebook page, of which I am a viewer. And I got to say, every now and then you guys come up with another photo that I had not seen, especially some with Bob Holliday with kids, say at a performance or after a performance. So there is some more material. Plus, you know, Bob, Brian, you were there, and Steve, you were there, and I were there. That whole weekend, when Bob was at Metropolis, all kinds of things were going on, and there's lots of photos of him interacting with the fans and seeing his display, in the Super Museum and so forth. So let's just say I'm open maybe to do that. I kind of see the rest of the year hawking this thing and getting it out as much as I can, but we'll talk more about that, because in the case of Superman on Broadway being reissued, there is new material, where in Superpup there wasn't. Superboy, very little of John Rockwell and Metropolis, and that was it. That's all there was. So we'll see.
Yeah, well, books are certainly trending. Um, there's uh, there's a few new ones coming out. I don't know if the light is allowing me to
There we go.
show this, but there will be. Let's see, what am I doing wrong that this can't show? Um,
That's better. There we go.
There you
there
go.
will be further information about this one
Ooh,
on the
interesting.
Superman in Advertising and Media Facebook group, and this is a proof copy, and so more information to come.
Wow, there you go. An
Oh,
exclusive. Thanks, Brian. That looks awesome.
There we
We're
go.
looking forward to seeing more about that.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And you do a great job on that Facebook, Superman in Advertising and Media. I love following along with all the posts that you put up there. And speaking of our Facebook groups that we do have, Chuck, there was somebody who said, Chuck Harter, I know that name. And he says, wasn't that person in the Monkeys tribute band once upon a time?
oh boy. You never get out of the Monkeys. Yes, I played a Monkeys tribute band called the Missing Links. I was Michael Nesmith, and I also did a documentary on them called Hey Hey We're the Monkeys. I wrote it and did just about everything except direct it. And what was nice is all four Monkeys cooperated, and including Michael Nesmith, who didn't always do stuff with the others.
Mm.
And in their way, all four of them liked it. And as long as we're on the Monkeys, I'm going to do a shameless plug, and I think Brian will plug me on this. At the current time, along with writing, I'm also a musical entertainer. I go out and I play gigs, and I sing and play the guitar and tell funny stories and sing. Well, I did a show recently. I don't know if you can see it, but anyway, I'll tell you. If you go on YouTube, Chuck Harter, no, that's better.
Yeah, go for it. There you go. There you go, Chuck. There's your chance.
Okay. Whoop, whoop, there.
Yep.
There. Okay, Chuck Harter,
In person.
in-person sideshow books. YouTube, Chuck Harter, in-person sideshow books. Check it out. It's a show I did recently. It went very well. But the reason I bring it up is, one, it'd be nice to get some more views. But the other thing is, there's a very funny story of when I went to Pennsylvania and hung out with Dave Jones, and we ended up in the biker bar. And Brian saw it and called it a gem, and it's very funny. It's completely
It is a gem.
outrageous,
You've got
and
to
so
see it.
if you want to see a song, yeah, it's pretty funny.
On
Let
YouTube.
me ask you three a question, if I may.
Cool.
We'll start with Steve, then Michael, then Brian. Steve, what was the thing or reason or event that started you on your Superman journey?
Well, for
Was
me,
there
it
a
was,
specific thing?
yeah, well, for me, growing up in the 70s, I'm born in 71. So for me, at the prime age of, 7, 8 years old, the Christopher Reeve movies were what got me into Superman. I also grew up with the Saturday morning cartoons like the Super Friends and the New Adventures of Superman reruns. And so, yeah, those were Superman was always a character that I was very fond of and drifted towards. But it was then, like in the early 90s, when the internet was very much in its infancy, that I started going online and seeing communities about Superman, that I really got back into, looking at Superman as a hobby, and started reading the comic books, and then the internet, and then the website, and everything else that went from there.
Yeah, similar
Wow.
to Steve.
So do you?
Now, go ahead, Michael.
Oh,
Okay. Similar to Steve, I'm a little younger than him, but Christopher Reeve and the Super Friends were omnipresent in my childhood. And when I was 11, 1987, I started buying the Superman comics, and that flipped a switch for me because before that I was more of a Batman guy. But for whatever reason, I just fell in love with the character, and that led me to really not only read the comics but watch everything I can. It's like I said before, it's easier today, but back then you had to track down like VHS copies of stuff, and
yeah.
finding books like yours at a comic shop in like 1998 and just being like completely blown away that there's research material about this stuff. So it wasn't only just loving the character and reading his adventures, but just learning everything I could about everything about him.
Brian.
Well, for me, it was the George Reeves. For me, it was the George Reeves television series, which was on Channel 11, WPIX in New York City. And yes, there we go. And also, one summer, I was born in 1954, so I go back a ways. And one summer, I had the flu for a few days, and a girlfriend of my late sister brought me a stack of DC comics. So between the DC comics and the George Reeves television series, I was hooked at a very early age, and I've never looked back.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's interesting you mentioned that, Brian, because Jim Hambrick has a semi-similar story. And I remember the first time I went to Metropolis in 2003, the other guests were John Heems Newton, Kirk Allen, Phyllis Coates, and Tommy Bond, and me, whatever. And I remember walking into the Super Museum and having the reaction that most people do of just astonishment. Look at all, oh my God, it's Disneyland with Superman, or, the whole thing. So later I talked to Hambrick and I said, well, Jim, you're clearly into this. I mean, my God, you're into this. What started this? And he told me an interesting story. I don't know how old he was, but he was a kid in 1965, and he had a near fatal illness. It didn't look good, and he kind of knew it even as a kid. And his mother brought in a Superman lunch pail. Probably had a painting on it with the little thermos thing, and gave it to him. And he hugged it, and he said, for some reason, it took a turnaround and he got healthy again. So he always felt that Superman's spirit coming in that lunch pail saved his life. And when you go into the museum, if you can focus after all that stuff going on, there's a glass bubble kind of up high. In it is a lunch pail. And that's the lunch pail that started the whole thing. And I thought, well, isn't that a great testament to how heroes to all of us when we're young can impact us in such good ways? You know, and that's what happened to him.
Yeah.
As far as me starting, probably the George Reeves series, I would say. I vaguely remember the comic books around that time, but I was very young. It may have been the newspaper strip, because I would read the funnies every day in the newspapers, and he was in there. And it's interesting that the artist in the 50s was Wayne Boring, who drew Superman, and he kind of drew him stocky. And he drew an interesting thing that I don't know if any other artist have ever done. When he showed Superman flying, it was like he was running, standing up. He would have one leg up, upright, and he'd be flying as if he were running in the sky. Do you remember that?
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, and I never saw that again. Yeah,
That was something that Bob Holiday emulated on stage.
That's true. That's when they had the harness and pulled him up.
Yep, very much.
Because they kind of turned him a bit fat, you know, and then they pulled him up. So it's very interesting. I still like Superman. What do you guys think of the latest movie, or whatever the latest Superman is? Do you guys like it?
Yeah, well, Michael and I have been pretty vocal on our thoughts on Henry Cavill's version of Superman, and while we like Henry Cavill as a character and as an actor, we've had our issues with the way the stories have been told. Brian, do you want to weigh in on this one?
Well, this is stepping in a minefield. Let's just say I really am not a fan of the new interpretations, either Henry Cavill or Tyler Hoechlin. They need to get back to what the character is all about. They need to get back to Christopher Reeve and George Reeves. That's what the character is, and these new interpretations, not my cup of tea.
Fair enough, fair enough. Well, sadly, gentlemen, we are running towards the end of our show. We don't have a lot of time, so I wanted to thank Brian. Thank you for coming on and being a guest speaker, a caller. So thank you. It's always good to see you, and we've got back many years as well. We'll have to get you on when you have more information about your book.
Yeah,
sounds good. I'd love to do it.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. Talk to you next time.
Thank you.
That was Brian, and thank you, Chuck. Really appreciate you coming on tonight. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I hope the book is a huge success second time around, and that everything goes well for you with the promotions of the book. And it's been a real pleasure catching up with you and having you on as a guest tonight.
Well, I want to thank both of you guys for having me on and talking super the last videos. Like I said, anybody who sees this, please pick up a copy in whatever format you may like. And I'll close by saying Superman has meant a lot to me in my life and has meant a lot to many people. And Superman will always endure. And whether some are unhappy with the current interpretation, the interpretations change. And it's very possible they will get back to a more traditional approach, or whatever the fans may like. But the point is, they're still doing it. Superman is still a very visible presence and always will be. Thank you, guys, and catch you next time.
Thank you, Chuck. Really appreciate it. Take care. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
That was Chuck Harter. Really appreciate him being guest speaker. Oops, sorry, get that off there. Guest speaker on our show. It's been a real pleasure having him on. And Michael, that was an interesting interview, interesting conversation. We could have gone on for hours.
Yeah, I know. I again, it's really neat just being in this position to talk to the people that are the names on the books that are on my shelf. You know, I buy reference material on Superman whenever I can find it, and when you mentioned that we were doing this, I was just like, wait a second, and I literally on my hutch here, I have like a bunch of Superman reference books, and ironically, both the Superman on Broadway and it are right next to each other. So that was
There
a
you go.
nice little bit of happenstance.
Well, folks, we obviously didn't get a chance tonight to talk about our regularly scheduled topics. There's a few things that we wanted to touch on, with Superman and Lois as the main villain being cast. Chad Coleman will talk about that. That's the gentleman right there on your screen. He's playing a major villain in season 3. Could it be the head of Intergang? We don't know. We'll wait and see what happens there. Also want to talk about the character profiles. Remember I mentioned Lara last week about my adventures with Superman? Those have come to the fore, and there's been more of those. You can check those out on our website. So I was on the money there. And yeah, we didn't get to do This Week in History. We will do quickly the fan favorite question. I know we're going over time, but we did have one respondent for that, so we might as well get to that now. Our fan favorite question response, or our question was, what is your favorite fan art that you have done of Superman? And we had one person who sent in this.
Oh, wow. Yeah, this is from Alexander. And he says, my favorite Superman fan art I did last year is without contest the Superman panorama celebrating the red trunks of the outfit and the 1001 ways of designing it until the DC New 52. Even Dan Jurgens congratulated me on this one. And he had a little smiley face.
Excellent. So thank you for that, Alexander. That was an awesome fan art. So we appreciate you showing that to us. And our new fan favorite question for this week is, what is your favorite alternative Superman costume? Since that we've just had that image there, what's your favorite version of the costume that's out of the ordinary, the different, from the classic one? Let us know by getting into the fan favorite segment of our show. Email address is there on the bottom of your screen. Or should be info@supermanhomepage.com. Send in your responses. We'll get to that fan favorite segment next week. But that is it for our show tonight, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in to hear our interview with Chuck Harter. We are on Spotify now as an audio only as well. So we apologize if we sometimes are referring to things that are visual that we're seeing on our screen. But if you're on Spotify, you're not seeing it. We will try in future episodes to make mention of what we're looking at if we are showing something visual that you can't see when you're using the audio-only version on Spotify. But for now, thank you everyone for tuning in to Superman Homepage Live. Michael and I will be back next week for our regularly scheduled version of Superman Homepage Live on Monday, September, what will that be, the 9th? No.
Yes.
9th?
No. No, it will be, today's the 5th, so that'll be the 12th. It
will be the 12th. So the 12th of September, 7:30 p.m. Pacific time. Look forward to talking to you then. Until then, be sure to check out supermanhomepage.com for all your daily news updates on everything surrounding the Man of Steel. Thank you to our sponsors and patrons, Douglas Meacham, John Patrick Van Pelt, and Tina Murray. And to my co-host, Michael Bailey, thank you very much.
Pleasure as always, Steve.
Go get some rest, Michael. We'll talk about DragonCon next week. Want to hear all about what happened. But until then, folks, thank you very much for watching Superman Homepage Live. I'm Steve Eunice. Thanks for watching. See you next week.